Welcome to the Grace Hour Show, a Christian program that takes a dive into our daily challenges and helps us learn our faith in a practical way. My name is Pastor Barry Quirk, and I'm joined by Pastor Justin Schaller.
Hello.
Welcome back, Pastor Justin.
Thank you.
Newly back from, well, not so newly now, but not so.
Yeah, when was it? 10 days ago, maybe I came back.
Came back from India.
Mm-hmm.
Had a great trip there.
Hello, my friends in India.
Yes.
I was just telling Pastor Barry how tuned in the churches in Bangalore, Mumbai, Calcutta, Chennai, all the churches are very connected with what's going on here in Baltimore, which was great. And I was there for 10 days in Bangalore, spent a few days there. We had a conference. It was a phenomenal time. Wow. Love those people very much, just building relationships with them over the last couple of years, visiting. And then in Mumbai, my dad was there, Pastor Gary, Kathy Grinwald, and just had a beautiful time with Pastor Binu and Pastor John Kenny, just running the conference. They did a phenomenal job. And I don't know how many people were there, 500, 600 people, and it was a party. It was a spiritual party.
That's incredible.
A lot of joy, a lot of humility, I think, is the key.
Yeah.
That a lot of these people just, they definitely sacrifice to follow Christ, and Christ just blesses their lives and then the unity of the church, and it was just fullness of body life. It was evidence of just the kingdom of God on earth, and it was just a beautiful time. So thank you for all those people that are listening from India.
Yeah.
And we'll be seeing some of them. We have the convention coming up in 5 weeks or so. Mm-hmm. And so we're going to be seeing some of them come and travel here to be with us in Baltimore. And that's going to be an exciting time.
It's really incredible we get to do these things. You know, just I actually had the privilege of picking up Pastor Gary and your dad at the airport at Dulles when they returned, and just got to hear a little bit fresh off the plane, you know, and just what an awesome time. I recall last convention, I believe it was, I met a gentleman who told me that he and his wife and their kids, they have a meal, and it coincides with when the Grace Hour is playing, and they're tuned in listening to the show.
Oh,
they were
great.
telling me about different shows and different topics, and I was blown away to think they're,
puts a little bit more pressure on us. We just thought we were sitting in a little tiny room with Jehu just talking to ourselves, and next thing you know, there's people around the world that are tuning in just to fellowship with us.
Yeah, it's just a conversation between a couple guys.
Let's keep it that way.
Yeah, we hope it blesses people out there, but really, we all know that we're doing this just for us.
It's our hangout time.
It's our hangout time. Hey, it gets harder to get when you get responsibilities in life, doesn't it?
I know.
I mean, we grow up, and then there's things we got to do, and it's incredible. Well, today we're going to talk about a really cool subject, perseverance. And let me ask you this question. It's a random question, but who's your favorite character in the Bible? I mean,
favorite character.
You can't take away Jesus. I mean, that's the obvious. We know, but maybe what character sticks out to you as somebody that you enjoy, or just?
Well, obviously, the people that are in there that are portrayed the most are the obvious ones.
Yeah.
Abraham or David, Solomon. In New Testament, you have the apostles, obviously Peter and Paul, but there's some unsung heroes in there as well. Yeah. So Epaphroditus is always one, just because I love that portion of Scripture so much. And Epaphroditus in Philippians chapter 2, John Mark, obviously the Apostle Paul for me, just because there's so much that he wrote, and you can see his personal life, and you're able to relate to him on certain levels, just because he was so transparent in the sense of the struggles that he went through, and then his hard attitude of what his mission was. He was an amazing person to follow. There's no question about that.
Yeah.
Epaphroditus. Let's go with Epaphroditus.
Okay. Good. I like that.
But it's the Apostle Paul, but Epaphroditus.
Yeah. I mean, Apostle Paul is the low-hanging fruit. We could all say, the Apostle of Grace, biggest testimony of grace, arrested by the grace of God on the road to Damascus. We love that. Since you're going to ask me, who's your favorite, Pastor Barry, I'm going to answer.
Who's your favorite? You're setting that up. I didn't even pick up on it. Who's your favorite, Pastor Bear?
You probably heard me say this before, because I talk about it a lot because I like the principle, but it's Eleazar, the son of Dodo, the Ahoite, right? And the reason that I love Eleazar is that he's one of David's mighty men. And he's the one who fought the Philistines, and his hand clung to the sword until every last one of them was destroyed. And I just love that principle of him holding fast to the sword. And I think that goes in line with what we're talking about here today about perseverance and, this principle of holding on to the promises of God despite obstacles, because we could look at our lives today, and I work in a school, and obviously there's conflict that happens in the school, and there are some parents in life, and I'm not saying in our school, our parents are all perfect and wonderful and awesome, and I love every one of you amazingly. But there are
sign up for next semester, please.
I'm so thinly veiled here, but the principle of conflict avoidance is something that's like it's a real thing in some people's lives. They don't want their children exposed to conflict. And you're a Christian school, and why do you have conflict? And my answer to that is because we're human beings in our Christian school, and but how do we, what does conflict do to us is the bigger question. How do we take on conflict? And I like to think that conflict is the thing that can sand off the rough edges. It can help us learn how to navigate through life. It can help us to endure. And, I think that's part of this principle that we're talking about with perseverance is being able to face obstacles and difficulties and trials, even becoming tired in the way, but not becoming tired of the way. And I think those are things that pop into my mind when it comes to like perseverance, clinging to the promises of God, not being so occupied with the enemy, but just keeping the promises in front of us and using them. And, that's our biggest defense.
Yes. Perseverance. So we're going to be talking about that today.
Yes.
And when we're talking about perseverance, there's a theological term, perseverance of the saints.
Yes.
We call it eternal security.
Yes.
I think perseverance, just that phrase, I don't necessarily really like it because it puts the responsibility on man too much, that man has to persevere to the end, where I rather think of eternal security as preservation of the saints,
right? Meaning
that God is going to be the one that's going to preserve us to the end.
Yes.
And so we can maybe talk about that. But to bring up Eleazar, because when you said that, this brings me back to the Genesis 15 story, Genesis 14 and Genesis 15 story. And God gave Abraham a promise that Abraham was going to be a great nation and have a family, and his barren wife was going to be able to birth a child. And Abraham didn't trust God for that because he just saw that it was impossible. So he had somebody who
reasonably,
but he had somebody in his house that he actually offered to use to bring about God's promise, and his name was Eleazar. And the word Azer in the Hebrew is God is my help. Eleazar. You could look at the word Azer as being help or someone who comes to your rescue. It's actually a military term, Azer. The first time you actually see it is in the Garden of Eden in Genesis chapter 2, when God is going to create Adam a partner. And in our English translation, it says that God created Adam a helpmate. But the Hebrew word is that God created Adam a Azer. And that word is used for Eve because she is the one who is going to deliver Adam from his situation that he can't procreate. So God's going to be the one that's going to provide an Azer for him to rescue him so he can complete his mission and be able to be fruitful and multiply in the earth. And the word Azer is used in the Old Testament, and it's really only used, it's used for a few people, Eleazar with David, and then Eleazar in Abraham's house, but it's used for God, that God's going to be the Azer for Israel to come and deliver them from their troubles and their problems. So that word Azer is a good word for us to understand because it's really God who's going to deliver us from our problems to be able to bring us to a end that he's declared is going to happen, but he's going to be the one that's going to be able to give us the means to be able to get there.
What a beautiful picture. And the completion aspect of how God operates, right? Like he creates Adam in the garden, he's creating everything, and it says, he looked at the animals and said, boy, Adam needs
ain't going to work.
Yeah. And like thinking about this, I'm sure it was not a late arriving revelation to the Lord, but more of when he decided to roll it out and how he wanted Adam to understand the role of Eve and that she was a helpmeet and not a helpmate, right? Like a helpmeet. She actually completed him. There wasn't this thing where like, I'm the man and I just need you around to lend assistance. That's any of us that are married knows that that's not how that works, right? But completion of who Adam is and taken from his rib and that whole picture. And I'm glad that you brought up the theological definition and the perseverance of the saints. And, obviously this week's topic is holding fast to the truth. So salvation is obviously paramount to holding fast to the truth. Without a thorough understanding and a solid doctrinal conviction about our salvation, the finished work, the fact that our security is because Christ paid the price, had nothing to do with us. We didn't earn it, and therefore we can't lose it. Our position in Christ is secure the moment that we're saved and the Holy Spirit comes into our life once and for all, seals us, and we understand that, and it's fundamental to our faith. And then there's our experience, and our experience, is not that our sin nature was eradicated, and it's not that we have. As a matter of fact, we enter into our old sin nature sometimes, and it has disastrous consequences, right? And we know that God has given us a new heart, a fleshy one, and not the stone heart that we had. But we still from time to time operate in that old heart with that old motivation. And anytime we do that, it has an impairment on our relationship with God. So really, the two subjects, the hypermone and the this persevering or enduring or being steadfast in trials has everything to do with the fact that our position in Christ is secure once and for all, and that our experience can line up with that on a daily basis, but that we're growing in grace and knowledge. You brought up earlier John Mark as one of your favorite characters. That's pretty controversial because John Mark, he was a guy who was not getting along and sent up. But we know in the bigger picture that this little rough edges that were being rubbed off ended up meaning that there was two teams going out. So in God's mind, it's like, oh, your little human disillusionment isn't going to stop my plan. It's going to actually multiply my plan. So I love to think like that a little bit outside the box and to think about how our position in Christ being secure and yet our experience, we got to reckon on the fact that who he is not changing. Right? And who he is in the equation is not something that's negotiable. And when we understand that and we have a thorough understanding of who he is, then I can see who I am much clearer because of who he is.
It's beautiful. Yeah. If you look at the story with Abraham, that God made that commission to Abraham, and he called Abraham righteous. And the idea also in the Hebrew of righteousness is right standing. This is how you interact in a proper relationship with God. And if you interact with God properly, you're called righteous. So what is a proper relationship with God? It's that God says something and you trust him. And when you trust for what he with what he says that you're righteous. With Noah in Genesis 6, it's the same thing. The problem with having a relationship with God is that God doesn't want initially, he doesn't want to have some sort of covenant. He wants to just have a relationship that's just built on the fact that he says something and the human being actually agrees and trusts him. The problem with Abraham is that Abraham trusts and then he walks in it, and then the next episode he's failing and he's not trusting God. He's going down to Egypt and he's becoming a snake and he's lying and he's deceiving. Yeah. So God has to formulate this covenant with Abraham in Genesis chapter 15. And what a covenant is a business relationship, we could say. So if you and I go into business and you're my best friend and we say, hey, Pastor Barry, let's start this car washing business, and we could do a lot of great things with it. We can make some money. We can employ people. We can give money away, whatever it might be, whatever the mission statement is. But if I said to you, you're my best friend, but I think it would be a good idea if we had a contract, that would, from the outside, be saying, man, those two guys actually don't trust each other long term. Yeah, right. Or the way that I like to look at it as well with an analogy is if you have someone who's extremely wealthy, a married guy or a guy who wants to get married and he's very wealthy and he does a prenup with his wife, from the outside that feels kind of icky. It feels gross because he doesn't fully trust his wife, and he's making a public declaration that I fully don't trust her down the road. Even though I love her, I don't trust her. So a contract in one sense feels a little business-like, or it feels as though that one party can't trust the other party, right? But in life, we just know in a fallen world, we have governments, we have laws, we have contracts, just because human beings are sinners. So when God comes to Abraham and makes a contract with him, he's basically saying to Abraham, listen, if you break or violate the trust relationship that we have together, there's going to be repercussions for it. Just like if someone goes into business, you and I go into business and we don't have a contract, if you steal $50,000 from the business, someone's going to get hurt from that, and there needs to be repercussions. In the covenant that God makes with Abraham, as many people know, that God actually put Abraham to sleep, and he makes this covenant where he takes animals, he cuts them in half, splits the animals, and walks through the animals and rehearses this covenant agreement that he's making with Abraham. But the only problem is that he put Abraham to sleep and made the covenant with himself.
In a terrible sleep.
In a terrible sleep.
Yes.
And so this is somewhat foreign to us because we're dealing with contracts with lawyers and we're writing down paperwork and putting our signature down on it. But in the ancient world, they would actually do this, and it would be two people that were coming together, formulate a marriage or a business, and they would hold hands and walk through the dead animals and rehearse whatever the covenant might be. And they would say something like this. They would say, if I break this covenant with Pastor Barry in this business, that let me become like these animals, that the break of trust is so severe that there has to be a penalty, even a penalty to the point that there's got to be shedding of blood. So in the story of Abraham, God does that, and then Abraham wakes up. Now God is able to have a relationship with Abraham. Even if Abraham breaks part of the covenant, there's going to be repercussions for it, but God's going to be the one who actually pays for it. So when you get to the story of Christ, and he's in the Garden of Gethsemane with his disciples, he has this relationship with his disciples, and he says to his disciples, at this point where the sins of the world are starting to come on him and the wrath of God is just at his doorstep and he's going to go to the cross, he says to his best friends, could you guys just stay awake, and could you guys just pray for me as I'm going through this? Just like a good friend could come alongside of me in a hard time and just help me.
Yeah.
But the picture that we get from the gospel writers is that the disciples went to sleep, and Christ was going through this procedure where he is going to pay for all of the sins of the world. Abraham's sins, the disciples' sins, and the gospel writers give us this picture of the disciples falling asleep just like Abraham fell asleep.
Yeah.
And the picture is that those disciples and Abraham are in that covenant, but the ones who broke the trust of the covenant are sleeping and not doing anything. But the one who hasn't done anything wrong in the relationship is the one who's going to pay ultimately for their failures of the break of the covenant. So I love the picture of the business idea because, again, let's just go back to it and just say, you break a trust in the business relationship and you steal $50,000 from the business. So now we're $50,000 short and we can't pay our employees, but you just siphon the funds. So what I do to keep the business relationship going is I go to my personal bank account, tell my wife, listen, Pastor Barry just sold $50,000 from the business, but I want so much to be in business with him that I'm going to take $50,000 out of my own personal bank account and put it back into the business to cover up for your sins so that the business can continue. You do it again, then you do it 10 times, then you do it 20 times. Every single time you do it, I go back to my personal reserves and put it back into the business to cover up for the sin. The question is going to be, why am I doing that? And the answer is because I love Pastor Barry so much. I love how I'm putting myself in the good position in this analogy, Pastor Barry in the bad one.
Thief.
But the idea is that after a certain point of time, you're going to realize that I just want to have a relationship with you. Therefore, I will pay with my life any kind of debt that you've actually brought to the relationship, just so that we can continue having that relationship together. That's the forgiveness that Christ has given us to make a covenant with us so that we can continue with him to the end and get to heaven.
Wow. That's a great point. And you started out by saying, there was no need for a covenant in the initial.
He doesn't want to have a covenant.
His word is his deed, right? And this is the thing we learn about God, is that when God says it, it's true. He cannot deviate. He cannot lie. His word is truth, right? And Abraham, who says, I want to have a covenant with you. Let's have an indication that your word is going to remain faithful. And God says, fine, listen, small faith, small-minded. He didn't say it, but you could say that his addressing the covenant the way he did was all for Abraham's sake. But then I love the fact that even in that, it's like, okay, Abraham helped set it up. They put the animals in the four corners. They split them asunder, and then he goes to sleep when it's time to actually do anything that actually makes the validation of the covenant happen. It has nothing to do with Abraham and has everything to do with God. And I love this picture, and I think it's very important that we understand it, because in our salvation, in the preservation of the saints, it has everything to do with God's side of the equation and has nothing to do with our side of the equation. We are the ones who are asleep. We're the ones who required the agreement, and yet we're powerless to make that agreement happen. We're absolutely the recipients and the beneficiaries of God's grace and his mercy, and it has nothing to do with us. So here we are, asleep at the wheel. God gives us something, and it endures forever. Now, the scary part of this is that we as believers can get this mixed up and think that somehow it's our merit that brought that covenant across to God. But this is the beauty of God saying, while you were yet sinners, I commend my love towards you. I didn't wait till you were able to be a worthy business partner. We don't have the ability to be a worthy business partner. In that equation that you just said, not only did I not have the ability to be a worthy business partner, but I was a pretty poor business partner. And I kept going back to the well, and I kept going back to the well. And one day, your graciousness overwhelms me, and I fall in love with the relationship, and then I don't ever want to hurt that relationship ever again. But we're believers, and we face difficulties and trials and tribulations, and somehow we want to think that we're the main character in it, or that it's all about us. And Billy Graham said that trials and tribulations can show the strengths and the weaknesses of a relationship. When we are in the midst of a trial and we endure, we be not weary in well-doing, right? But have patience, and then we receive the promises of God. And the promises are one-sided, but our agreement, our recognition that we don't have anything to do with it, doesn't cause us to continue in a relationship where we're taking the 50 grand. But it brings us to a place where we have a relationship that says, I want what you have. It's a love relationship. It's more than just a formal agreement. It's the very nature of your character, which is loving and gracious and merciful, and it's towards me.
Yeah, and if you think of a covenant in a marriage, you do a covenant legally, and it sets boundaries. And those boundaries are set so that it's very hard to get out of it, even though you still can get out of it. But they're set because it's going to be a headache, a year, 2 years of divorce, and you're thinking, do I really want to go through that financially, emotionally, with my family, with my kids? And it can happen. There's no question about it. But the boundaries are set to make it difficult to get out of it. And the reason is because people can change over time. And we're trying to, or with marriage, we could just say, God is saying, I want to try to confine people so it's not easy to get out of it, because the ultimate thing is love. And love is the ultimate goal. And the Apostle Paul says, I serve not because of law, not because I have to, but I'm constrained by love because I've been in a business relationship with a God who made this covenant and paid everything for me, and he's forgiven me 1,000 times over. And now I'm just starting to get to the point that he's only forgiven me just because he wants to sit down with me and have dinner and have a relationship with me and just love me.
Yeah.
That's the end goal of the whole thing. So if I'm loved by somebody who's forgiven me 1,000 times and then sacrificed themselves for me just so they can sit across from me and enjoy me and I can enjoy them, that is really where a believer says, I want to obey and I want to be obedient and I want to have a right relationship with the one who has saved me and paid everything for me, and I want to honor him and be loved by him and then love him in return. That's a much different picture than saying I'm trying to fight sin, I'm trying to persevere to the end, I'm trying to fight for holiness, I'm trying to fight for some level of approval from God, when in fact the approval's already come and I just need to rest in it and just agree with what he's already done and just enjoy him. And when you enjoy him, he loves you and he changes you and he transforms you. And then all of a sudden his will and his mission becomes your will, your desire, and your mission in life. And the result of it is that you have fruit in your life that comes forth, and the fruit is evidence that you have true and living faith.
And you nailed it right on the head with these three words: rest, agree, and enjoy, right? Because the Sabbath is every day for a believer. Like, we are completely at rest because, as a matter of fact, he says labor to enter into that rest. Like, if you're going to labor, make it that you labor to enter into what God's already performed. And this is maybe the perseverance is really, it's the topic about a one-sided covenant. And that one-sided covenant is true. It has nothing to do with whether we decide we believe it or don't believe it. It's true. We don't experience it unless we agree with it. We don't experience it unless we rest in it. But also we can enjoy it because we do rest in it and we do agree with it. And the fruit of it will be love. It's the other night your dad preached on the fruit of the Spirit, and the love is the product of the fruits of the Spirit. It has a result, right? But it has everything to do with God's production in our lives. And then the consequences of it, we get to experience this incredible love. And I think that's a really important part of it, because people are struggling today in their relationships with God. People have real doubts about their relationship with God. They walk through life thinking, I don't know if I'm pleasing God or not, or I'm doubting the will of God for my life, or am I doing the right thing? And there's so much strife and turmoil, and God just says, would you come unto me, all you that are heavy laden, and give me your burdens. I care for you. I want you just to cast your cares upon me. I'll lead you and guide you in truth. My word will be a light unto your path, right? Like, my word is truth. Sanctify me with your truth. This is the beauty of the one-sided relationship. And that's why it's important as believers, when we're falling short, or, we've entered into that old sin nature relationship again, or we're cleaving to the dust, or we're trying to entertain something because we want a momentary pleasure. And God says, leave those beggarly elements aside and come to the place where it's fresh and renewed and eternal and enjoyed. And we walk around in truth and we have joy in our hearts. Honestly, we can be in the midst of trials and tribulations and troubles, and we're not moved by them, because the truth that's not going to change is that he has given us something, everything that he had to do with it, and when we had nothing to do with it.
That's it. And the phrase eternal security and perseverance of the saints, or I like preservation of the saints. If he began the work, he's going to complete it. The question is, do I have true and living faith? And the definition of eternal security is that at one point I received Christ and I made a confession with my mouth. Romans chapter 10, verse 9, I believe in my heart and confessed with my mouth that Jesus Christ is Lord. If you do that, you are saved. The question is, am I saved at that point? And the answer is yes, by faith. And you're changed and you're a new creation. The genuineness of that faith is this topic, perseverance of the saints. If you're a genuine believer, you're going to persevere. We get this phrase from the book of Revelation. So the question is someone a true believer? And there's a lot that's said in the New Testament about how you actually are going to know if you're a true believer or not, because people can make confessions. Jesus, his first parable is talking about seed that falls on different types of ground, and there's different responses, and they're all positive responses, but they don't produce any fruit. So the whole point of that parable is that if you produce fruit, then you know you have true and living faith. So for us as human beings, there's other people. 1 John chapter 2, there's going to be people that are with you and then they're going to leave you. And John says they left you because they were never of you. So they had a confession at some point, but that confession wasn't a true and living confession that actually converted them. It was just something that they said with their mind and with their mouth. So as believers, we don't really know in one sense with other people. Here's a good example, because you could say, even as a believer, I could fall into sin, and I could even use my mouth to say I don't believe, but that's actually not even evidence that I'm not saved. Because a perfect example is David. David fell into sin. He was a murderer. He was an adulterer. He lived a year in unrepented sin. And at that point, if you looked at him, you would say he's not a believer because he just committed that heinous crime. But he was a child of God, and he was a believer, but he was just backslidden and living in that state for that period of time. And then Nathan came, and Nathan confronted him, and David repented. Psalm chapter 51. If you looked at Peter and his denial of the Lord, which the Lord already predicted that he was going to do, and he told Peter that he was going to deny him, if you saw Peter at that point standing outside of that trial where Jesus was, and Peter denied Christ and cursed, you would say he doesn't have true and living faith. But Christ already told him that he had true and living faith, because he said, you're going to deny me, but when you do turn, not if you turn, but when you turn, strengthen your brethren. So from the outside as human beings, there could be people that from our vantage point fall away, but they could still be believers. They're just living in sin, and they're living in unrepented sin, and they could even make a confession that they're no longer Christians, but the evidence is that there's going to be some point that they're going to return. And we don't have any knowledge of that. Maybe it's at the point that they actually do that. But it does say in 1 Peter, he says the trial of your faith, being much more precious than gold, is going to try your faith. And it's trying your faith not because God needs to know that you're saved, but he wants you to know that you're saved. And he says you're going to go through trials that could be really bad, even to the point that you fail or you stumble or you don't have any faith. But Peter says the promise is that you're going to come out the other side and you're going to still love Christ. Wow. And that's ultimately the evidence. If you are truly reborn and you're a new creation, you have a new faculty inside of you that has a desire for God. And when you see that, it could be 2 years, 5 years, 10 years that someone falls away, but in them is a new nature, and they still have, like Peter says it, you don't see him, but you still love him. And if you still have a love for Christ and you still have a desire to be restored by Christ, that's great evidence that you are born again.
Beautiful. These are really precious thoughts. And when we think about the character and nature of God, is that he's a long-suffering God. You know, we are not long-suffering. There's a reason that God says man looks at the outward appearance, but God looks at the heart. Because we make judgments, snap judgments, immediate judgments. How do I feel? How does this make me feel? God's not interested in any of that, right? We're looking through the lens of a marathon. We look at sprints. We look at where are you right now? Oh, he's running so fast. He's going to win this race, right? Well, you could run for 100 meters. You could run world record speed and finish last in the marathon. And I think that the whole beautiful picture here is that God's looking at the whole picture, right? He doesn't look at the 40 years on the backside of the desert. He doesn't look at the persecution of believers. He doesn't look at, all those things that you mentioned, David being a murderer. And he doesn't look at the Apostle Paul's unbelief until he gets arrested by the grace of God. He doesn't look at any of that. He looks at the overall picture, and he's saying, I'm going to continue to draw you. I'm going to continue to be faithful. And yes, at some point, we're going to come to this realization that all of my own efforts are falling short. Like, it's really true. All of my own efforts fall short. And we get stuck in cycles where we try our own efforts and we get frustrated. And it puts us in a place of even being a false evaluator, because we look around based at my own insecurities and my own lack and everything that's not in my life that I'm projecting on everybody else. And God's just saying, it's not my heart in this situation. My heart is, I want to draw you with cords of love, right? Not legalistic tendencies, not obedience, which is on the surface, but underneath it is a wrong motive. Like, am I going to be the one sitting on the right? Like these motives are not genuine relationship. It's something that's on the surface. So,
and the goodness of God leads to repentance.
Yes, exactly.
So it would be the picture of David for a whole year sitting at a table, and Jesus is right across from him, and David doesn't even look at him. And then a year later, Nathan says, hey, Jesus is sitting right in front of you and wants to deal with the thing that you just did, but you're ignoring it. And David realizes Jesus never left him.
Wow.
Jesus never stopped loving him.
Yeah.
Jesus was never giving up on him because he made a covenant with him and with David. And how could that love not crush you to the point that you want to change and you want to turn and you want to face him and have a relationship with him, because that's really what you're seeking for.
Yeah.
And I love the story of John Mark.
Yes.
Because the Bible is not afraid to talk about man's frailty. It actually loves to expound on it, because we live that on a day-to-day basis.
Absolutely.
And we have people around us all the time that live through the same situations. But John Mark is just a young guy, and he fails the Apostle Paul, and the Apostle Paul gets angry with him, and John Mark goes home to mommy and gives up on the mission and is just selfish and timid and has no courage. But then at the end of the Apostle Paul's life in 2 Timothy, he says, bring me a couple guys that are so useful to the ministry and that I love so much, and one of them is John Mark. And then John Mark goes on to write the Gospel of Mark. So you could look at John Mark and say, oh, he's not a believer. He's a detractor.
Yeah.
He fell away from the faith. He's an apostate. But in reality, he's loved by Christ just as much as the Apostle Paul, but Christ just needs to love him more and install courage in him, and he matures and develops. And then there's decades later, there's John Mark and the Apostle Paul together as brothers loving each other. What a beautiful picture.
And this is, I think, really why I love Eleazar, because it's the picture, to bring it back full circle here, it's the picture of clinging to the sword, because really the Bible is written also in a one-sided way. It's God's faithfulness and my acceptance of it, right? Like the story of redemption that starts in the book of Genesis and goes all the way through the end of Revelation, and all of the turmoil and all of the unbelief in Israel and all of the redemption and the captivity and then the bringing out of the captivity and the relationship of the church and the church having amazing victories and amazing persecution and ups and downs and man being awesome at moments and then horrible at moments, and God saying the whole picture is going to bring glory to me. Right from the start to the end, the whole picture is going to bring glory to me. And if I cling to the promises of God, then my shortcomings aren't the issue, because I'll understand that if my heart condemns me, God is greater than my heart, 1 John chapter 3. If I have a relationship with God, I have an unction from the Holy One. Right, I have an unction from the Holy One. It comes from God towards me. It's not me. I didn't deserve it. I didn't. I can't walk around as a holier than thou do-gooder, because there's nothing in me that's holy. I'm at the, at the end of the offering. I'm sound asleep in a terrible sleep because God put me there, because I have zero capabilities to do anything, and yet God is faithful, and He's going to walk through that agreement so that I can see His faithfulness, and I'll keep messing it up, and one day I'll come to the conclusion that, man, this so messing it up is not the way to go. But so there's the love of God, and it's amazing. And I think this is why, you just got off an airplane, and somebody would say, well, how do you go 20 hours on an airplane, or however many hours it is, to go hang out with some people and talk about Jesus in a far off country where you could get sick, or you could, your sleep patterns are messed up, and we go, because this is the only thing we're on this earth to do. Honestly, I talked to my staff this morning, and I was like, last night I was discouraged. I'm telling you, I went home and I said, this month has been the most challenging month of my 12 years as principal of the school. This month has been brutal. And I said, I went home and I thought about it. And I woke up this morning and said, do I really want to do this? And I said, my wife and I talked about it, and I decided, yeah, I'm done with being worried about what happens when the devil is trying to attack me.
That was a great punchline.
Right? Yeah. I just said, I've
executed perfectly. I got a little worried.
People
right
thought he just resigned on air. He resigned. I heard it.
Job opening.
But I realized that it has nothing to do with me. I'm not the main character. Like, this is the revelation I had coming to work this morning. You're not the main character. So yes, it's trials, and yes, it's troubling, and yes, there's negativity, and there's a fair share of negativity, and it can come from a lot of different ways. And sometimes I mess up in my decision making, and sometimes I'm an imperfect principal. Sorry, all you people paying that money. But the bottom line is, it's not about me. It's about Jesus. And the investment that I make in our students has everything to do with the faithfulness of God. And I'm just somebody who's enjoyed that same faithfulness, and I want to share it freely, because freely I've received, so freely I want to give. And that's Amazing. What our lives are all about, right? This is why you spend your life, and yeah, okay, so you're a teaching pro, golf pro. But if I asked you your identity, you're not telling me, yeah, I'm a PGA teaching pro. You're telling me, I'm a believer, and I have a ministry, and that ministry is to invest in people. And I also do this thing, but it's really to support my missionary habits, right? And to support your family, and it has nothing to do with your ego or your identity. But it has everything to do with the fact that God had a plan. You jumped into it. It came with a provision. Imagine that. The plan of God came with a provision, and it's pretty fun. I would say that really what a gig to be able to do something you love and enjoy, but the excuse to get to know the one-sided relationship of Jesus Christ and to experience it in a way that is so satisfying. That at the end of it all is this beautiful crown of righteousness that God has given to us. What a joy.
Romans chapter 8, we use it a lot, Romans 8:28. That the trials that come into our life are for our good and his glory. But that whole chapter is about sanctification. So the end goal for all of us is to be conformed to the image of Christ. And we're in many different arenas doing that. And we all have to operate with faith and trust and see him come and be our Eleazar or our Azar, our help. Yeah. I was just thinking, we only got a couple minutes, but I could maybe say it in 90 seconds. But just for our listeners, because maybe they could jump into the Bible and they can read it. But interesting story with Abraham. God gives him the promise and he doesn't trust him. And he says, God, I don't think you can provide for us a child. So I have this other guy, Eliezer, and we can use him because he can be our delivering help. God says, I don't need a guy by the name of Eliezer. I'm your Azer, and I'm going to help you. But they still don't follow the plan. And Sarah gets Hagar, and they develop their own plan. And whenever man tries to develop his own plan and tries to be his own saving help or rescue,
good old Ishmael,
people always get crushed. It's like the little saying that you got to crack a few eggs to make an omelet, that the end justify the means. But when man comes up with his own plans, he's going to destroy somebody in the process to be able to be his delivering help. But in that story, it's interesting because Hagar, she gets impregnated by Abraham, and then she flees because Sarah is just being her oppressor, and she oppresses this Egyptian woman. So the Egyptian woman runs into the wilderness. She's running back home to Egypt, and she ends up in the wilderness by a well. And who shows up but the angel of Yahweh? Christ himself shows up and ministers to her and gives her a promise and tells her actually to go back to your oppressor. But that little story, I like it, and anybody listening, you can look it up and you can read it and maybe think about it. But if you think about that story in Genesis 15 and 16, that's an Egyptian woman in a wilderness where God's providing for her water. And then you're going to get a few hundred years later, you're going to get the Jews who are now being oppressed by Egypt, who are going to go into the wilderness, and God's going to meet them and provide for them water. So you have an Egyptian woman who's being oppressed, and then you have other humans. The oppressor now becomes the one who's oppressed by the Egyptians, so it reverses. But in both of those stories, you have people that are trying to provide their own security. Like Pharaoh is trying to keep the Jews because he wants their economy and their security. And Sarah is using this woman Hagar to provide security and the promise that God's given them. But by doing that and trying to produce your own security and your own wealth in your own eyes that seems good, you hurt other people. So people are hurting people in both of those stories. But it's amazing how in Genesis 16, it preludes the story of the Jews being in the wilderness where God comes and is their Azer. But before he does that, he does it to this poor Egyptian slave girl, and he's her Azer. So the picture is for people that are fighting with each other, the end result is that you're never going to get the help or the significance and security from other people, but it's that both people need to turn to God and have God be their Eliezer. Mm-hmm. And when that happens and God is your help or your rescue, then you can go and you can serve people rather than destroying them.
Which is really the whole mic drop moment of what we just talked about, the faithfulness of God and coming in tune with the provision, whether it's in the garden or whether it's in the desert or whether it's in running from out of fear, out of an oppressor. Mm-hmm. The faithfulness of God is our deliverance.
I think he wants to be the Azer, the delivering help. He's created, I think, the whole picture in the Garden of Eden that Adam's there. He commissioned a promise to Adam, be fruitful and multiply, but there's no one to multiply with. So God's going to provide the wife who is his Azer, his saving help to fulfill the mission. So the whole picture is that God's going to put you in situations that naturally speaking, you can't deliver yourself. And if you do, you're going to do a lot of damage. So you just have to wait on him in his timing, and he's going to show up and give you what you need to complete the mission. And for us, that's full sanctification to be like Christ. Mm. And through all the trials and tribulations and the ups and the downs and the failures, all you have to realize is that God is sitting across the table from you and you're in the contract that he's already paid in full. So sit, relax, enjoy him, and let him love you. And he'll be your help to be able to complete the work which he's called you to do, which is to persevere to the end. But he's really preserving you to the end.
He's the faithful party.
He is.
Thank you, Jesus. Well, we heard us. That was
awesome.
Yeah, it's amazing, and we
need that deep down in our souls to know that.
Yes, we do. And if you want to hear more about the faithfulness of God, come to our service midweek this week. Happy Memorial Day to you all. Today is Memorial Day.
I'm gonna go have a dog and a burger.
Yeah,
maybe two.
We took time out of our Memorial Day to come in and record the show. Not really. We're on Memorex today, but all of those of you that would have chatted in today and chimed in, and Loretta and Vladimir and all the different ones, thank you. God bless you. Have a great day today. Hope you're listening, and you are experiencing the Azer today in a way that only can be provided by the greatest provider of all, Jesus Christ. So, folks, thank you for your time today. Join us again at the same time tomorrow for another edition of The Grace Hour.